This piece is entitled In and Out. No relation to the burger. It's in because if you look at it, it's made out of a solid block of wood. The wood is redwood. And then the nails are zinc-coated nails. Some of them are going in, some of them are coming out. And my subtitle for this, it was kind of my personal joke, was a masochist Rubik cube, because the pieces that come out are quite sharp, and if you did try to move it, you could injure yourself. But that's kind of part of the whole effect that I'm going for, is this self-injury of people who are viewing or interacting with the art. Now, normally it can be presented like this, and it is identical on all the sides except for the grain of wood. And that also makes a statement right there, because what it's saying is that, you know, in the similarities, there are differences. One of the ways that I actually like to present it is this way, where it's more tetrahedral. And it also gives it the effect of being off balance, because one of the theme of this piece and the other pieces is this feeling of imbalance when you look at it, that rather than it comforting you, it challenges you. Rather than coddling you or being a traditional sense of pretty, like wouldn't that be nice behind the sofa, what I want is the idea that it makes you uncomfortable while it's beautiful at the same time. I mean, this piece is very tactile, and if you have a chance, you should actually touch it carefully. Of course, if you bleed on it, that's absolutely fine, and you could leave fingerprints on the surface here. That would add to the effect of it. But it really does have a very interesting feeling, because it's at once sharp and hard, and at another time, it's quite soft. So it's really an interesting, sensual experience with this piece.
And was it the materials that drew you to making this piece, or was it the concept?
You know, sometimes it's a little bit of both, because in this case, I was fascinated with the block of wood, and I have seen on construction sites, you know, the patterns of screws, but you never, I don't think you've ever before seen a pattern of screws like this, because it's theoretically impossible to have the screws coming out here when the block. So that's another thing, is it's a mental challenge, because you look at it and you go, how is this made? How did he drill these through from the other side, because they can't possibly be that long? And so then also because they're all going at different angles. So in a way, it's also like a magic trick. You know, when you saw someone in half, you know that there's a trick there somewhere, but you don't know where it is. And that adds to the interest. But this is one of the objects that I also think is actually just physically a beautiful object, even though it's pointy and sharp and challenging. But I love to touch it, and you should really touch it.
And is the aesthetic end result as important or more important than the idea behind it?
You know, I will say on this particular piece, the aesthetics were very important, because it did start with the idea of the wood and the different grains of the wood, and that being natural versus the intrusion of the man-made elements. And you compare the grain, which is natural, so it's not in nature, you don't have generally perfect repetition of shapes, except maybe in some crystalline forms. But then you have the overlay of the man-made things, which are put in there precisely and perfectly. So you are contrasting this man-made perfection against the natural imperfection, and together they're very beautiful.
And what relation do you see between this piece and, say, the previous piece?
It's really almost the exact opposite of that, and yet it does have this tying element of the screws or the nails or the hard, sharp pieces. It's the opposite because it's so totally constructed. The other piece was found, and this was totally constructive and took a lot of just ingenuity to construct the piece. But what it has in similarity is this feeling of danger, this feeling of possible pain and injury. But in this piece, it's funny because even though it's just covered with them, almost like a porcupine, it still is oddly pleasing to touch.
And why redwood as opposed to?
Well, the color of it, the texture of it, and also the smell of it. See, I really believe strongly, and I didn't smell the other piece, but should have, that all your senses want to be involved. It's not just about how does it look, you know, how does it feel, how does it smell, in some cases, how does it taste? Now, I don't recommend that simply because it may not be sanitary, but in this piece, you can smell the wood, you can smell the coating of the nails, the metallic. And so you start to get the idea of the Chinese elements of wood and metal. And the idea of water that's in here is just kind of the way you feel it. And so it's more elemental.